Hello and good afternoon, and thank you for joining me for this session titled Right Away. I am Kina Culver. I am your presenter today, and we are going to discuss some different strategies and writing techniques that can be used in order to help our social and emotional state, as well as the academics for our students. I know many of you have so much experience with your with in being an educator and just being in this field, but yet we're going to dive into looking at some things that has touched us all. We are all not a stranger to trauma and different experiences that causes us to reflect and causes us to just not know what to do or even become overwhelmed. And so we want to talk today about right away, where we can improve the social emotional learning for our students and for adults, as well as the academic portion. And so we're going to go right into this session. Thank you all so much for joining us. And so let me start off with asking a question. So we've all had the situation where we've gone into work and something has happened, and at that moment, we are feeling overwhelmed. And so when we are feeling overwhelmed, there's some different ways that we can deal with it. We can deal with it and cope with it in positive ways. We can cope with it in negative ways. And so I just want to give you the opportunity to let me know, how do you cope when you're feeling overwhelmed, when you're just feeling like you've had enough? In the chat, I want you to write either A or B. Write A if you're like SpongeBob, where you're like, oh, these healthy coping mechanisms, nope, they're not for me. Those are going in the trash. I'm going to deal with this my way. Or are you like the baby here, where you're trying to just hold it together? You're trying to stay positive. You're trying to make sure that you keep things the right way. All right. All right. I see some of those answers coming in the chat. And sure enough, we all have our different ways of responding to being overwhelmed. We have those different ways of dealing with things. And we know that, to deal with something is it means coping. So we have our different ways of coping with situations. But how many know that there are ways that you can cope with things that are negative? There are things that are positive, but today we're just going to focus on those positive things. And if you take a look at the chart here on your left, this is a coping strategy chart. It evaluates and it lets you know how to cope with different things. So you can ask yourself some questions, because that's mainly what coping is dealing with things. It's a way that we deal with situations, a way that we deal with experiences. And so some of the ways that we can deal with it falls into a category of where you are thinking to yourself, how can I comfort myself? What are some different ways? What are some different things that I can do to bring comfort to myself in this situation? We also have questions that we ask about, what are some of the different things that I even have access to? What are some of the resources that I have to be able to cope with this situation? We also know that there are times where we ask ourselves, what options do I have? Is there an alternative to this? What way can I make sure that the response that I'm about to give is the best one? And then finally, what am I supposed to do with this? Whatever the situation is, whatever you find yourself going through, whatever it is, we can ask ourselves, what am I going to do? What action am I going to take? And as we begin to evaluate ourselves, and as we begin to ask ourselves those questions, we come to different points. And if you take a look at this chart, it kind of sections it out for you, where you can see here in the maroon section, whereas what actions can I take? What are some things that you can do? Can you start planning? Can you start refining some things? Can you start just reading information? What are some things that you can do? Even when it comes to how can you comfort yourself? We see that some of the options are, is there an emotional piece that I can do here? Is there something that some way that I can express this emotion that I'm feeling. What can I do to comfort myself? And then we see that the social component. Um, who can I go to? What things can and what strategies have I already been taught, whether it's by a therapist, whether it was by a spiritual leader, just what different things, what resources do I have to be able to cope? And then we see that what options, what alternatives do I have? What are some different ways that I can address this situation? What are some different ways that I can just evaluate it? Sometimes just putting ourselves in the space of someone else and just sitting in another seat helps to give us an alternate view. And so we want to go on, and move from here about coping, because coping helps us to deal with that social and emotional piece. We know that, our social and emotional development deals with how we respond to situations, how we go through different things in the proper way. And so I'm going to share with you the 5 competencies of social and emotional learning. And so sometimes we think that social and emotional learning is only for children. It's only for the students. But let me tell you, social and emotional learning continues on throughout our lives. Because if you notice something, as we get older, as we continue to mature, as we develop, things in our lives change. And the response that we may have had at one point in our lives may be different at another point. And so I want to just share with you these 5 competencies for social and emotional learning. And they are self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision making. We know that, our self-awareness, sometimes the age of social media has caused us to be so self-aware, so subconscious, so conscious of what others are thinking. And so it brings about this bombardment of wondering, what are other people thinking about me? What are they saying about me? Who do they think that I am? And so that's that self-awareness piece where you take the time to think about those questions for yourself, not worrying too much about what other people are thinking about you, but what is it that you think about yourself? Self-management. We have to make sure that we are guiding ourselves the appropriate way. We have to make sure that the things that we are doing, that and the things that we are in the way that we are taking care of our health, the way that we are what we are eating, what we are putting in our body, the things that we are subjecting ourselves to. How are we managing those things? So that's that self-management. How are we coping with those different situations? How are we telling ourselves, nope, that's not the thing that I want to do. I want to do it this way. How are we managing ourselves? And then we move on to our social awareness. And while I've already touched on the social media aspect of things, I want to just touch on the fact that just right now, even the students that you may come in contact with, the children, whether it's your own children, your grandchildren, nieces or nephews, students at the school, they are consumed with social awareness. And so we find that during this age, during this time, rates of suicide and depression and anxiety have skyrocketed. And we know that it is because of this social awareness that children and even adults are having more so. I know during the pandemic when we were locked up and we couldn't go out to different places. And so many people started being more social technologically. They started watching more videos. They started watching more movies, and that brought about a different viewpoint for some people that caused them to have a difference in their social awareness. And so while we want to be aware of those that are around us, while we want to be in tune with going on around us, we have to make sure that we are doing these things properly and in a healthy way. And so our social awareness means that we're not just so self-absorbed and so self-consumed, but what are we doing? We are paying attention to the others that are around us. We are caring for them and thinking about what is it that I can do to help someone else. And that goes into our relationship skills. When we are selfish and self-absorbed, and maybe even that person that closes our door in the class, closes our classroom door and teaches things the way we want to do it, when we are not concerned about others that are around us, it speaks to the lack of community. It speaks to the lack of relationship skills that we have. And we want to make sure that these skills, that these things, that we are being cognizant of them, and that we are also modeling the proper behavior for the students. We want to make sure that we're modeling this proper behavior for the children, those that are coming up, those that are going to be our future leaders, as we as leaders here today, as we are navigating and going through this journey called life, during our in this field of education, where we know that we are touching eternity one child at a time. As we are going through these things, we want to make sure that we have proper relationship skills, where we know the importance of community, where we know the importance of camaraderie, where we know the importance of helping one another. And we see that in different facets of our lives, and we want to make sure that that continues to go on and be done in a healthy way. And then our last competency is responsible decision making. Our decision making, the things that we decide to do, is based on our mindsets. It's based on how we see ourselves. It's based on how we govern ourselves. It's based on how we see others. And it's also based on the interactions that we have with others. And so we want to make sure that those things are in order so that we can make those responsible decisions. We know that children, the amygdala doesn't develop fully until well into the young 20s. And so we know that we find children, whether they're in high school or middle school, just doing some irrational things and just making some poor decisions. But the purpose of the educator is not to just focus on the academics. It's also important for us to focus on that social and emotional portion. And yes, we find ourselves saying, well, I wasn't taught this in school, or I didn't go to school to be a social worker. I didn't go to school to be a psychologist. I don't know about all of these things. Yet, part of our educational background and training is child development. And so we've learned about these different phases of life. And we know, as we have to differentiate even within our classrooms, that everyone is at different points. Everyone is at a different place. And so it's important for us to make sure that we are doing what we're supposed to do to lead and guide students in making those responsible decisions. And it's also, as leaders, it's us making those responsible decisions for those that we have oversight over, those teachers that we oversee, those principles that we oversee. We want to make sure that the decisions that we're making are responsible, that they're not in our own self-interest, that they're not in just what we think is best, but we want to make sure that we are making the best decision, that we're making responsible decisions and being clear on what we're doing. And so we're going to continue here into our social and emotional learning competencies. And so I have a little activity for you. I'm going to show you some different pictures, and in these pictures, I want you to try to see what each one of these pictures represent. And so, just to recap, I'm going to go back just briefly to recap. We have self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision making. And so I want you to take this time to look at these items here. And I want you to let me know, and you can do this in the chat. They are numbered. And so what I want you to do is just kind of figure out, what are these pictures demonstrating? What are they showing us? Which competency are they aligned with? And so I'm going to give you some time right now. I'm going to give you about 2 minutes, just so that we can see and try to line up what these figures are aligned to. How are we were we retaining the information that we talked about self-awareness, when we talked about self-management, when we talked about relationship skills, when we talked about responsible decision making? I want to see what you were able to come away with, and lining these pictures up with the different competencies. So I'm going to let you go ahead right now. Just to reiterate, just make sure you can just type the number and then which of the 5 SEL competencies are next to, does the picture illustrate. You write the number and then the competency, one of the 5 competencies that it illustrates. We have about another minute. All right, 30 seconds. All right, all right. At this time, if you weren't able to get them all, we are going to review them now briefly. So number 1, hopefully, I want you to give yourself a pat on the back if you have, for number 1, self-management. Self-management, number 1 was self-management. So go ahead and give yourself a pat on the back if you had self-management for number 1. Number 2, this one was self-awareness. Sometimes when we're going through different things, when we're becoming aware of ourselves, we have to retrain our brain to think a different way. And so if you had self-awareness for number 2, go ahead and give yourself a big thumbs up. Great job, great job. All right, number 3. I think this one was a little bit easier because it was kind of right there in our faces. And number 3 is relationship skills. We see the 2 people there shaking hands, meaning that they are having some type of interaction. They're engaging in a relationship. So just go ahead. If you had number 3 for relationship skills, go ahead and give yourself a round of applause. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Number 4 was our social awareness. So for number 4, if you had social awareness on your paper, you typed it in the chat, go ahead and give yourself a big old hug. Just go ahead and just squeeze yourself real good for having social awareness. And our final indicator, our final picture, number 5, last but not least, is our, what is it? That's right. It was the responsible decision making. If you had responsible decision making for number 5, Give yourself a high five. Sounds like a clap, but it's not really a clap. It's just you're giving yourself a high five. Great job. Great job. Again, number one, I'm just going to recap really quickly for those of you who may not have time to write it down or even just put it in the chat. Number one was self-management. Number two, self-awareness. Number three, relationship skills. Number four, social awareness. And number five, responsible decision making. Thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to participate in that activity. And we're going to move on because now we're getting into the crux of the matter. We know that we've talked about the social and emotional component. We've talked about how things go on and how things can overwhelm us. We talked about the good way of coping, the bad way of coping. Now we want to talk about a strategy, some strategies that we can use. And this is what we're here for. We're here for the writing component. And so here we are to talk about the three types of writing that will help us navigate through crisis, that will help us navigate through turmoil and different traumatic experiences. We have the three types of writing are reflective, expressive, and creative. Let me tell you something. Writing makes a big difference. There's nothing that we're going to go through in life where there's not writing. We text message, we email, we write papers, we handwrite notes, we send out mail where we have to write our address. Unless we have labels, then we have to type them out. But writing is in everything. And I want you to know that writing is also in social and emotional healing. It is not just an academic a concept. It is not just a way that we show what we know on the inside of our heads, but it's also a way for us to get the things that's on the inside of our hearts and in our souls poured out. And so we're going to discuss the three types of writing: reflective, expressive, and creative. So for our first one is reflective. When you are writing a reflective piece, the important thing is for you first to be in first person point of view, because this is something that the individual writer is authoring. And so it's not like academic writing where you have to take a neutral position. It is first person point of view. So in that writing, you write I, you use me, my, we, us. You use those words to make sure that you are taking ownership, to show the audience that you're taking ownership of what has happened, that these are your feelings. You are in charge of this writing. And so it gives you the opportunity to describe an event. Whenever you're doing reflective writing, you want to make sure that you are explaining or describing a situation or an event that has happened. Describe that thing. Write down the intricate details that you saw, that you felt, that you experienced. And then after writing that down, begin to think about it, analyze it, see what was going on. Why were you feeling the way you were feeling? How were you impacted? What difference do you start to feel? And as a result, you're going to move to the last portion, and that's start thinking ahead, where you start thinking about, okay, I had this experience. It made me feel this way. But now I've gained this knowledge, not just to gain knowledge. We know that the purpose of obtaining knowledge is to be able to apply it. And so in this case, we take that information, we take that knowledge, and we apply it to a future situation. And so that's what you do. You describe and explain an event, you analyze that event, replay it over in your mind to make sure you have it all together. And then you take the lesson that you've learned, the experience that made you better, or even sometimes our experiences puts us in a poor place. And that's okay too, because we're being reflective. Because now this last portion is where we're moving to, where we're going forward. And so that's the last point. Think ahead. Look at this picture. In this picture, we have a person that is looking in the mirror, but they have taken that mirror and turned it on themselves, where they've now have removed their face. It's removing a portion of you that you're so used to and that you just take for granted. And so take this time to cause us to do introspection. That's what reflective writing does. Allow us to take the time to start to look at ourselves differently. All right. So I have a little activity I want you to do. And I want you to write about a situation. What happened? So I want you to write about last week, how you had a most unforgettable experience. Think about an experience that you had last week and just jot that down. You can use this as a sentence starter. Last week, I had the most unforgettable experience. And then after you write that, you can answer the question, how did it make me feel? It made me feel, and continue on. And then that last portion, what did you do? Since I was feeling whatever way you said you were feeling, since I was feeling this way, I decided to, and you're going to write that down. And so just to go through it one time with you, last week, I had a most unforgettable experience. Last week, while I was away, I got a phone call stating that my mom, who was in the hospital, has to get her leg amputated. It made me feel helpless. I was so far away, but yet, even if I was standing there by her side, I still wouldn't have been able to do anything. I wouldn't have been able to change the situation or change the outcome. It made me feel helpless. And since I was feeling helpless, I decided to reach out to some of my friends. I decided to use some of those resources to try to get comfort, to try to be encouraged. I cried in the lobby of a resort because I felt helpless. I felt sad. I didn't know what to do. And there was nothing I could do. It was a situation that was going to happen, whether I was away on this trip out of the country or right there by her side. But I decided that I wasn't going to leave the trip. I wasn't going to make a rash decision in my emotion, but I was going to call in for reinforcement. I was going to call my friends. I was going to reach out to get help. Sometimes the best thing we can do, the best action we can take is getting help, reaching out from ourselves and getting someone else to help us through something, because we're not meant to do these things alone. We're not meant to go through life alone. We're meant to do life with others, building a community, having that social awareness and building those relationship skills. So thank you for some of you who have taken the time to write about an unforgettable experience that you had. You could take this time to write in the chat. Just those 3 lines. Last week, I had a most unforgettable experience. Write what that experience was. Write how that experience made you feel. And write, what did you do? What actions did you take? Sometimes just sharing what happened, whether it was a unfortunate situation like mine or whether it was something spectacular and extravagant, just sharing those experiences, having the opportunity to write those down and get them out and sharing them with others can sometimes help someone else. We just don't know what our story can do for someone else. that can cause them to receive the help they need right away. All right, our next type of writing is expressive writing. Now, expressive writing, this is what I call pouring out your soul, where you are just writing what you feel, those feelings and those emotions that may have been bottled up, and you're just being frank. You're just being honest, completely honest. All the feelings that you have, just being completely honest, getting them down on paper. Forget making sure your subject and your verbs are matching, forgetting all the structure, forgetting all of that, and just getting those feelings and those emotions out. Just getting what you're feeling on the inside out of you. Just taking the time to get all of that out. It's almost like a dumping where you're expressing yourself. And it doesn't matter how you do it. It doesn't matter what it looks like. It doesn't have to look like anyone else. It's getting what's on the inside out, because that's what writing is. Writing is our expressive language. It's the way that people are able to assess what we understand, what we know, how we feel. It's through writing. And so taking some time to express yourself in that writing helps to relieve some of those emotions, helps to relieve that tension. And so I have a picture here. And what I want you to do right now is just take a look at this picture. And as you look at this picture, I want you to think about a time that you may have felt how you think this person is feeling here in this picture. And in the chat, just 1 or 2 words, short phrases. Go ahead and write how she's feeling. Go ahead and write how she's feeling. What is she experiencing? Thank you. I see your responses starting to come in. All right. Our final type of writing that we're going to discuss is creative writing. And creative writing is where you are the author. You are the one that is able to take care of everything. You create everything. You formulate it the way that you want. It's yours. And so that's one thing about writing. It's very personal. And so when you're creative, you think of how you want it to be, form an image in your mind and begin to describe it. And then think about what goes beyond that image. What happened up to that image? What's going on during the course of that? And also what happened afterwards? And then just by creating that context, begin to just freely write. Begin to write that poem, write those songs. Sometimes just writing those words will be a beautiful song, will be a beautiful poem, something that will encourage someone else. Be creative. Look at this bird here. That bird is beautiful because it is created by so many different colors. And that's how our lives are. We are created by so many different experiences that it creates us into who we are. And so we all have creativity on the inside of us, even though we don't feel like it. We do. Take a look at this picture here. I want you to write one sentence. Give me the title of a song or a poem that would represent this. Just one. Just give me a title of a song or a poem that would represent this picture. And I want you to look at your fellow participants. Look at the responses of your fellow participants. look at some of the things that they're writing. Look at the creativity in what they're writing and how everyone is looking at things differently. This is a very powerful and pointed picture, and the ability to be creative is endless. It's endless. And these are even things that you can do with your students. Take pictures. We used to call them picture prompts, to prompt them to be creative, to pull out of them those things that aren't always there. And so our last activity, I have some prompts here for you. And I'm going to give you 3 minutes. Look at each one of those prompts. And then I want you to go ahead and write in the chat, which prompt would you respond to and why? Which prompt would you respond to and why? It doesn't have to be anything elaborate. I would respond to prompt number 1 because it's easy for me. I will respond to prompt number 2 because something major happened 5 years ago. I'll respond to prompt number 3 because I have some things I want to share with my younger self. It doesn't have to be anything extra. Just go ahead and take that time to write it and share those responses in the prompt, in the chat, excuse me. I'm going to go ahead and start our timer. Also, in the chat, for those of you who are willing to take part in this poll, I want to see who is paying attention to the characteristics of the different types of writing. And so there is a code there's a code, a QR code that you'll be able to scan right there in the chat. And if you could just tell me, what's the order of these types of writing? Go ahead and share. What's the order of these types of writing? And you'll be able to see the responses begin to populate on your phone. If you're looking at it from your phone, you'll be able to see the responses begin to populate. And so in the interest of time, I know we have about another minute and some change. So we just want to make sure that everyone is able to respond. You go ahead and respond. You have another minute and a half to go. Again, there is a QR code right there in the chat. Scan that and just see if you can identify what type of writing each one is. All right, we're coming up on about 30 seconds left. Go ahead and finish responding. All right, got 10 seconds. All right. And there we are. So Hopefully you got it right. The first one, where it says describe your adult aged imaginary friend. That one was, you got it, creative. We're describing an imaginary friend. So that's going to cause you to have to imagine and think of it in your mind and create what that looks like, an adult age imaginary friend at that. The second one, how have you changed since 5 years ago? Of course, we're going back in the recesses of our mind. That's reflective. And our final one, I really wish I could tell my younger self. That's expressive. We're expressing what things we really want to share with our younger selves. So there you go. We're going to, and I know you have a question. How does this translate to my students? How does this deal with children? Wow, it works for adults, it works for children, it works for anyone who implements it. We use this strategy when I was teaching middle school, also when I was over as a vice principal at a high school in New Jersey. These were the scores when they were in 7th grade. These were their scores. 19% partially proficient, 65% proficient, and 15% advanced proficient. Perhaps some of you, your districts look like this. Maybe your numbers look like this. But getting them to write repeatedly, getting them to work inside their minds and get those things and showing them they can analyze, they can think, they can pull their own ideas together. In 8th grade, none of them were partially proficient. Our proficiency rate went up to 77%, and our advanced proficiency rate went to 22.7%. It can happen. And so I want to encourage you to implement these strategies, implement the prompts, implement the way that I shared it with you, share it with someone else. Research shows that individuals forget 70% of what they learn after 24 hours if they don't do anything with it. It's up to you to do something with it. Don't take this time lightly. Use the things that you have learned and use the strategies that you've learned with right away, use them right away so that you can get what you need and so that the students around you can get what you need, so that those you supervise can get what they need, because it's all about growth and development. Be encouraged right away. You can do it. Again, I am Kina Culver, your presenter for today. If you need to email me, my email address is info@klaurenconsulting.com. Feel free to email me. I'll be sharing with you some writing prompts and just some different handouts. If you haven't already received them, if you need them, feel free to email me at the email they're listed. And what I want you to do is move right away and right away. Have a great day. Thank you so much for your time.